ever going to get out of this mess? I was born, 1944, black people in the United States weren't even considered a citizen. Can you believe that? Talk about no rights. You can't even speak up if you're not a citizen. And this gave birth to Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and the 23rd, 24th, 25th Amendment. My moment of awakening to racism. My mom and dad didn't teach me anything about what to look out for in the street, the expectation of being treated as a second-class citizen. None of that my parents gave me. I never heard a negative word about any racial group. And my mom and dad came from the South where segregation, they grew up under some terrible things. And I guess maybe they thought they were doing me a favor by denying me this information and say anything about it. I'm at a band rehearsal in a club in Philadelphia, and these protests had been going on in the street. It got so bad, somebody came into the club and said, "You guys got to come out here and see this." When I first came out on the street, I looked around. My first question was, why is everybody so angry? I had no background for anger, for fear, for misunderstanding. I was like what most white people are today. Why is everybody so angry? And I was amazed to see all of these police cars, and up on the roofs of the buildings were snipers, trained militiamen, as far as I could see in either direction. Hundreds of them. And the gentleman that became mayor of Philadelphia was a police chief named Russo, I think his name was. He had pulled this black guy off the streets and put in the back of a police van, and police were standing around this, kind of protecting the back of this truck. And there was a screaming and fussing going on inside the truck. So eventually, two guys managed to get by the police and open up this door. And he had 6 or 7 inches of his baton up this guy's rear end. And that's when I woke up. When I saw that sight, this white police chief manhandling this guy, something inside of me exploded, and I began to understand why everybody was angry. I hadn't seen it up to that point. And that was the beginning of my noticing what was going on in the streets when police stops a white car for a traffic violation, how polite they were. When they stopped me, they weren't polite at all. And I had a chance to get a new car at a very young age, brand new car, 19 years old, riding around in West Philly, which was not a high-income neighborhood. I couldn't drive 2 blocks without being stopped by the police. Want to know where I got this car? How did you get this car? The assumption was I stole it. I couldn't possibly own it. I have been through so much of that. I mean, I could tell stories from here to, but that period, I was around 18, 19 years old. I began to understand what racism is all about. And now, looking over my shoulder, I can understand the white person that says, why is everybody so angry? They're not taught any better. This situation in the United States has just leapfrogged out of control, mostly out of lack of understanding, lack of education. If the schools don't teach it, if the parents don't teach it, ignorance prevails. How are we ever going to get out of this mess? It's so embedded in their normal lifestyle, they don't think of it as a privilege. It's just normal life for them. So it's the people that are on the low end of that stick that don't have it. They coined that term, white privilege. Things that are going on right now, the sheer reaction to it, the ignorance of why this is going on, is a reflection of their lack of knowledge. The ones that are in the street have become aware somewhat, and they're willing to support. They see a diminution of their own integrity. They don't want to face up to the whole slave background. They don't want to be a part of that kind of thinking. Oh, that happened 200 years ago, 300 years ago. That's not me. It's a systemic, chaotic lack of information, and it has resulted in this, I've had enough. I can't breathe. Slavery has done something to the mentality of the African-American group. Slavery has marked us and left us with insecurities, doubts, frustrations. When they ended by law slavery, when they ended by law the lack of citizenship, the whites felt proud and thought, well, we did our job. All is said and done. They expected everything to turn over. But we're still living with those diseases, I call them.
So what you're saying is that a part of the problem is also the self-image of the Black community.
Within the Black community, definitely. We treat each other so bad. It looks like we have all this love and sympathy for each other. When you look at TV and you go up in the church and everybody's praying and hallelujah and we got to get this done and get that done. But the reality of it is we got a lot of problems we got to sort out in our own community. They don't talk about that on TV. They talk about the rights being denied. That's a big issue. That's where we should start. We got to get these laws in place so the cops don't feel empowered that they can do something and get away with it. Eliminating these issues and making things right in the United States so that the people get a chance to equally share what's in the Constitution is not going to happen quickly. There's too much to unravel in the Black community, in the white community. This is a good start. Well, let's take a look at the football clubs. I was so proud to see during some of the football games when some of the Black players had had enough of the racial slurs coming from the crowd that they were ready to walk off the field. But the teammates stuck together, surrounded the referee. They spoke up for the Black person. The voice was much louder. If the other groups that are not being slandered, in this particular case, let's say the whites, are in a position to speak up and say, no, this is not right. That is a huge voice. If Congress in the United States would stand up and say, this is not right, when the bigger group, it could be the other way around. It could be, I went through school with a minority white kids. My elementary school, there was one white girl in the class, in the whole school, and she was picked on a lot. We had to get together and support this one white girl. Say, hey man, you can't. She's one of us. She's here in our school. And the other way around, with the whites defending somebody that's being picked on that's Black. And it's got to do it at high levels. The owners of these companies have to come in and say, hey, we can't do this. We can't allow this. So when you see the boss of Amazon, the president of the United States, the head of this group, that group, and they are not respecting the fact that some of their employees are being disrespected because of their race or color, you need to do something. You remember how apartheid ended? The rest of the world said, we are not buying your stuff anymore. Everybody stuck together. And in the middle of that, Mandela was strong enough to be able to say the right words. It stopped. That's what we have to do, group together. And when you see people that aren't grouping together, then you have to group together and go against that, fix that. If you smell any kind of racial rhetoric, let that be a part of your education. We need to be a voice somehow. I can understand why a lot of people don't understand what's going on in the States, what's going on around the world. It's up to parents, it's up to the schools to educate the kids. Let them know what's going on. Even if you haven't experienced anything positive or negative yourself, don't use your own personal experiences as a backdrop. Use your position of authority. Do some research, read some books, ask some questions, get a little bit of information so that your kids don't grow up blind and ignorant to what's going on in the world. It's got to start somewhere. We can't just protest and be angry and expect things to change. It's a slow process. Educate. I had issues educating you guys. said, I got to prepare these kids. They don't see a Dane walking down the street, and you have to be prepared for that. A crowded bus. I take a seat on the bus. I never had to worry about room because nobody would ever sit next to me. A crowded bus. The seat next to me is empty. You walk down the aisle looking for a seat. Women are repositioning their pocketbooks, their valuables. They see me coming. They don't look directly at me, but you can see this subtle shift. They think I'm going to snatch something and run out of the bus. You know, I had an experience one night. This is what happens when you become conditioned to expect something. I was 16 years old, and my father, we were down there hanging out, and he had had a little too much to drink. He wanted me to drive his sister home, my aunt. And I was very proud that he asked me to drive her home because nobody ever drove his car. I dropped my aunt off, and I'm driving back, and I decided I'm going to have a little fun with the car, drive a little faster than you're supposed to. And there's a road there coming back to the house where I was staying at, where you come down, and there's a little dip, and then you go up over this little bridge. Well, I was driving so fast that when I went over the top of that bridge, all four wheels of the car cleared the road. It went that high up in the air. And when it hit, I lost control, and the car bounced off into a cornfield. And I couldn't back the car out of there. And the first thing I thought was, oh, my father's going to be furious. I got to get this car out of this cornfield. So I saw a house not too far away. We're out in the countryside. And I go up and I knock on the door, and a white guy answers. I'm expecting the worst. I'm expecting to get shot or something. And I said, sir, and I told him the story about I lost control and I'm in the cornfield, and it was his cornfield. And he says, well, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm down here visiting my family. And when I gave him my family that I was visiting, their name, he says, oh, the Farringtons. Okay, who's your dad? Henry Farrington. Oh, I got a totally different reaction than what I expected. He was warm, he was friendly. He said, let me see what I can do to get you out of there. And he hooks up the car to the back of my car, to the back of his tractor, and he drags the car out. We looked around, there were no dents. I never told my father what happened. But I was in and out of that cornfield in 15 minutes. The exact opposite of what I had expected. And that was a big lesson for me about having preconceived expectations. You learn how to be smart, and you learn how to deal with a situation, but don't expect the worst. Protect yourself, be careful, watch what you say. This expectation of being hurt or harmed or disrespected, that projection comes out of you. It might not be on your face, but people can sense that. And police officers, they're great psychologists. Oh, I got a mad N-word in front of me, hand on the gun. Every cop that has ever stopped me for a traffic violation, when he comes to the car and he sees me, the hand goes on the gun. And this goes all the way back to the 60s. You don't see that when they stop a white driver. I don't care if he's drunk and got drugs falling out the window. They don't do that.
After, the fight, protests, civil rights apply to African Americans, and then what?
That was a big victory, and it gave a platform to legally argue mistreatment. But in the end, you still have to stand before a jury, you have to stand before a judge. And just because the law was on the book, which allowed you to get that far, we weren't even able to get that far before. You were just killed, or you just disappeared, or lost your job. You had nobody to argue with. The laws were on the books, and you had a chance to argue, but you still had the anger and the frustrations and the hatred and the dislike of a larger community in the neighborhood, which at that time, unfortunately, were the whites and even some blacks. I can remember my mother telling me, I wish Muhammad Ali would keep his mouth shut. I couldn't believe my mother said that. She just didn't understand. My father was angry with me because I didn't want to go to Vietnam. And I said, why should I go to Vietnam? I said, they're cleaning out the black neighborhoods systematically and sending the black soldiers over there. 75% of my friends never came home. The white guys were the officers, and they stayed in the background. What civil rights did was the beginning, it was the tip of a big iceberg. If somebody shoots you, the pain of that injury stays with you forever. You might turn around and forgive. Maybe it was an accidental shooting. Maybe it was intentional. But you won't forget that pain. And that's what exists in the community. The laws are there. We have the rights. Everything looks to the outside world like, why is everybody so angry? It's because when you have to stand in front of the power, those laws don't mean anything.
A jury of your peers.
Jury of your peers. When a child is in your classroom and they come from an impoverished home, they're not eating, they're not sleeping, maybe they're spending the night out on the street, and you're trying to teach them recognition that they don't have the tools to be the best that they can be in the classroom. You don't persecute them for it. I have an understanding that the guy standing in front of me is just ignorant. He doesn't know better. I'm going to try to help him by being an ambassador. I'm not going to be what he expects me to be or she expects me to be. So you show that face under all circumstances. You know, let's understand something. When you go to the States, you don't have to be afraid. You have to be smart. There are certain places, they are very sensitive to outsiders. You walk into that community, they can smell an outsider, and they react to that because they're used to officials coming into the neighborhood bringing their crap with them. If you get into trouble and you need a friend or you need help, and you have to go to a bank or a police officer or some source of help, you have to be clever. The United States is a lovely place to visit, but you can't go in there stupid. You got to be aware of where you're going. The North is different from the South. The East is different from the West. It's 50 countries glued together by invisible borders. And that's one of the things that was a benefit for me being a musician. I got a chance to smell the air of all the states, many countries, many continents. And there's an old saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And that's pretty much what it's all about. So you just have to be smart, that's all, and careful. And hope that you don't have, if a cop stops you, I don't know if you guys remember, we were driving around in New England. Mommy was in the car. And the first thing, when I saw this cop coming, the first thing I said was, nobody in the car say anything.
I remember.
Because I knew that I was going to lie to this cop. Driver's license, I showed him my European license. And he said, don't you have an American license? I said, officer, this is my family. We live in Denmark, and I haven't had my American license about so many years. I'm lying through my teeth. You just have to be smart. You have that same issue in Denmark, maybe not as prevalent, but that doesn't go away. That's an endemic, pandemic problem around the world. People judge you by your color and the way you look. The best you can do, I don't think anything is going to change dramatically in your lifetime, is be vigilant, be smart, be independent, and don't let them see the weak side of you.
Yeah, but I remember my entire childhood. I remember from as far back as I can remember you saying, you have to be better than everyone else. Don't let them catch you doing something stupid.
Yeah. If it ain't yours, don't touch it. If it ain't yours, don't walk on it. It's getting better very slowly. It's going to take generations. Even from when I was a child, there's enormous change that I can see. I would say for the better. The cops, the police, they're still a problem. I think this need for power, a lot of men and women, when they become a police officer and they get a sniff of what power feels like, I think it does something to them psychologically. It runs away with their character. Many are strong enough to not be tempted by that. Some wise gentleman taught me that it is not intelligent, it is not smart to believe everything you read. All you can say to this individual is, you don't have your facts right. You need to do more research, because you're not going to change their mind if they're using that as a defense mechanism at that moment. You got to give them information to make them think, not argue, because you'll never win that way. Give them something to think about. That makes sense. Enormous pride. Never thought I would see that in my lifetime, and it gave me hope. But I'm not stupid. I know that after Donald Trump leaves office. The problem's not going away because he went away. Barack Obama going into office is not going to control those guys that are in Congress. As a matter of fact, that's just what happened. And today, I just saw on the news just before, they presented a bill to Congress that eliminated the control that police have when they have to subdue somebody. Yeah, a law that forbids. That law is not on the books right now. So this thing with the neck is considered a wrongful practice, but there's no law against it, so they can't prosecute them properly. The Republican Senate rejected that law. That's what we're up against. Now you want them to understand, what are they angry about? You gotta be kidding. They have no clue. I'm ashamed to be American right now. I love my country, but I'm ashamed. I'm happy for what's going on in the streets. These people, they brought something back to me that I thought was lost. If this hadn't happened, this man that lost his life was a sacrificial lamb. Without that, this wouldn't have happened. But I'm ashamed to be American. It's a powerful statement to make. I'm not going to give up my passport because without that, then I feel like I'm moving backwards. I want to fight somehow, stand up. Love you guys. Sorry you gotta grow up in a world like this. That's about it for me, I think. I don't have any more to say.